Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk today a little bit about car debt and the price of cars and etc. Along with everything else, inflation's driving the cost of everything up. COVID was horrible in a lot of ways for buyers. It was great for sellers. If you had something to sell, a house or a car, it was a great time because prices were up, people were consuming because that's what we do, and it drove a lot of prices up. Now, if you were buying it, it was horrible. At that time, I actually had a car that needed repair, and I could not get the part. And I was fortunate enough to be able to trade the car off to a dealer that wasn't worried about the part that I needed. It needed a catalytic converter. The check engine light was on because of it, even though the car ran fine. You know, trying to get rid of a car with a check engine light on is horrible. And it was a great car otherwise, but I couldn't get the part. It was 6 months or more before I could get it. And it was a very costly part because at the time I was driving a used Mercedes, and boy, repair costs on those things can kill you. And that's with any fancy cars, obviously. I don't have a Mercedes anymore. I drive my 2011 paid for Honda Pilot, and proud of it. She's got 160,000 miles on it, and it's been a great car since the day we got it. So anyway, what I'd like to talk about though with car debt, it kind of surprises me because the amount of that cars cost anymore, even now after COVID. Right now, the average price of a new car is $41,000, and I can honestly tell you I have never paid $41,000 for anything except a house. I'm not saying that I wouldn't at some point possibly spend that kind of money, but I have certain criteria that I use to buy any car. But anyway, even in the used car market right now, though, used cars are averaging $27,000. And that's what I found every time I've shopped for a car. I typically try to stay 25 to 30 at the most, and then I keep that car till it dies, basically, or close to it. Typically what happens in our household is that I would rather my wife and kids have the car that is the newest and most reliable, so I give them that car to drive. I take the used car regardless of the situation, and that's what I drive because all I do is go back and forth to work. I don't typically haul the kids around or the wife around in my car. So I've always given and wanted her to have the nicer vehicle, so I knew I didn't have to worry about her. And that's the same case now. She's in Florida with the newer car. I'm in Northern Illinois with the older car, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And I will drive this car to Florida when the time comes. Partially because our goal is to not have debts, especially going into retirement. And I don't know that I'm going to be fully retired, but it's more along the lines of why take debt with you if you don't have to. And if I need a car, that's one thing. Right now I don't need a car, and there's nothing wrong with the one I have. But to go along with those prices, the $41,000 for the new cars, that puts your average price point or average payment monthly at $737. And for the used car, it's running around $520. And I can attest to that. If you stay at the $30,000 or less and put a decent amount down, you're going to be in the $500 a month payment schedule area. The downside is that the average payment time is 68 months. And I don't think a lot of people realize how long they're tying themselves down to this car payment. Because I can tell you, in my past experience and others that I've talked to, the buyer's remorse is real, and it really kicks in after you've been paying for a year and you've still got 5-6 years longer to go. And they've inflated these monthly payment schedules out to accommodate for the more expensive car prices, which is, again, to me kind of silly because it's almost like predatory lending. You're like they had in the early 2000s with houses, where they were getting people into these houses regardless, And what they were doing was splitting up the tax and insurance, or they were taking out two loans. They had a second mortgage to make up the difference in the first 20% down for a home, and then basically putting people in two payments to save them PMI insurance. But in the long run, all it did was give them more debt and owe more against the property. And then, of course, the loans came due because most of them were balloon loans or short-term low interest, and then they went crazy with the interest rates after the fact. Well, it's kind of the same thing with cars right now. They've made cars that if you spend, even my credit union, if you spend $30,000, they'll give you 72 months. If you spend $40,000, they'll give you 84 months. And all you're doing really is locking people into these long payments for vehicles that don't hold their value. That's the real issue, is that at least with a house, you've got value when you're done. When you have a car, it drops in value from the minute you start it and take it off the lot. And that's one of my conditions when I buy a car. I always buy used and low mileage, etc. Because I know that the retail on them is horrible. I know that they don't hold value. So I don't want to be wasting years worth of income to pay for something that's not worth a thing when I'm done. And I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, how about consider leasing? I actually have a friend that I work with that was leasing a expensive car, and he said, well, the only way I can afford it is if I lease it. Well, that means you can't afford it. I mean, my dad always used to say that credit and credit cards are for people that buy things they can't afford. And that kind of rings true, especially when it comes to cars, because people end up buying more cars than they can really afford. And there's the same thing with cars as being house poor. I'm sure you've heard that expression, where you buy more house than you can afford, which is what happened in the early 2000s and through the crisis. And then being car poor too. They buy a lot of car because they show that they don't really have a lot of other payments and maybe live in low conditions otherwise. But they want to be able to drive that nice car. So it's part of that keeping up with the Joneses, I think, that a lot of people get caught up in, and it's just really not a good idea. But anyway, leasing a car right now, the downside of leasing is all you're doing really the whole time is paying off the depreciation of that vehicle for the next buyer. And then the car goes back to the dealer, and they turn around and get retail for it again, based on whatever the current value is. And this friend I was telling you about, he actually bought his car at the end of his lease, so he paid retail for it twice. It's just horrible decisions to have a lease, unless you're gonna buy it outright later. And I still wouldn't recommend it, because when you kind of do the math, the interest on leases works out to be like 15 to 17%, sometimes more. Not to mention the fact that you have to walk in and put the same 10% down to buy the car. And you have to have excellent credit. Well, if you have excellent credit, why not just buy a car you can afford? Something that's within a price range. But even right now, the average lease payments are right around $583 a month. And I'm sure that's not buying anything too expensive. But you're locked in for 2 or 3 years, low mileage, and you're going to have to pay for you're paying the depreciation off. For the next buyer. And it's just kind of a silly way to do it, because it's just, there's no financial benefit to leasing a car unless you're my mom's neighbor is a retired gentleman, and he turns in his lease every year because he likes buying new cars and driving new cars, and he probably only puts 5,000 or 6,000 miles on them anyway, but he likes the idea and the thrill of having a newer car. He's retired, he doesn't have bills, I'm sure he's in decent financial shape. But most people that buy that are leasing do it for the wrong reasons, not for the right reasons. So I think what we need to really think about is, number one, is our cars worth it? I don't think they are when you're going to spend too much money. 2, unless you can really afford that payment, is it something as a retired person you want to take into your retirement? Because as I was looking up the information and trying to get more informed on it, 49% of the people 55 and up are carrying car debt still. And that carries into retirement age of 65 and up too. And I'm going to talk about that tomorrow in another video, because I gathered some other information I want to talk about separately. So in my opinion, try to pay that car off before you retire, because you don't want to take any more payments. I don't think any more payments into retirement than are necessary, because then you get a true idea of, this is my fixed income, this is what I'm spending every month, this is what I can afford. If those numbers work out and you've got extra money and you want to use that to buy a different car or a better car, go for it. I'm obviously not giving financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just giving you my opinion on these things. But literally, I just think that cars are such a horrible investment anyway, that I certainly wouldn't want to be paying for one going into retirement. One last quick little story. I have some friends that I work with as well that are buying their cars now, and before they retire, to make sure they're paid for before they retire. And I think that's a good idea too. Some of them are taking money out of their 401ks because they're at 59 and a half and they can do so without penalty. So they're taking out and buying the car outright possibly. But I know that people do that. So it's something you can consider if that's what you're up for. That's not my situation right now anyway. But again, I'm not retired yet, so I'm trying to make sure I'm out of debt before I go there. As usual, thanks for watching. I appreciate you doing so. If you like the information, give me a thumbs up or leave a comment. I'd like to hear from you when you do. And other than that, we'll see you next time.